All right, good afternoon. I'd like to call to order the SCBC meeting. It is 2:01 p.m. And so thank you for all joining us. I would ask Carol Mick with the Statewide Benefits Office, do a roll call of SCBC members to document attendance. Thank you.
So in person, we have Director Maxwell, Paul Baumbeck, Karen Peterson, and Bill Overly. And logged in virtually, I have Secretary Gordon, Deputy State Treasurer Brendan Fountain for State Treasurer Davis, Director Stephen Constantino, Deputy State Court Administrator Ashley Tucker, and Jeff Tashner. Is there anyone else? And I do see Commissioner Navarro on as well. Looks like we're just missing the Lieutenant Governor.
Okay. Thank you.
And Controller General Miller.
Gotcha. All right, so I just have one quick announcement. Just as a reminder, discussion of agenda items is limited to members of the State Employee Benefits Committee and their designees, as well as subject matter experts from SCBC consultants, Willis Towers Watson, and the Statewide Benefit Office. Members of the public have the opportunity to provide comment at the end of the meeting, as indicated in agenda item number 6. We ask that anyone who is not a member or designee of this committee refrain from providing commentary during the meeting unless specifically requested by the chair or vice chair to ensure the integrity of the committee processes and discussion. Does anybody have any questions regarding that? Okay, thank you. All right, agenda item number 2 pertains to the approval of the June 13, 2025 SCBC meeting minutes. Hopefully everybody had a chance to look at those. I would ask if there's any discussion and a motion. I would entertain a motion.
I move to approve the minutes from June 13th, 2025.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Any of those that would like to abstain or oppose? Abstain. Mr. Baumbeck would like to abstain, I'm sorry. Anyone else? All right, I think we have passage of the minute. Thank you so much. All right, so that brings us to the Statewide Benefit Office Director's report. So I'll turn it over to Stephanie.
Thank you, Director Maxwell. Actually, before we move to that item, there were also executive session minutes. If you would like to make a second motion to approve those.
So moved.
Second.
All right, I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those that are against? Abstention? Abstaining, Mr. Bond.
I'll abstain as well. This is Trinidad.
Trinidad. Thank you for that. I think all the minutes business has been taken care of. Now we'll move on to agenda item number 3, which is the Statewide Benefit Office Director's report. So I'll turn it over to Director Stephanie.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I have a few updates on FY26 benefit program implementation. At the December SCBC meeting, the committee approved contract award recommendations for the Accident and Critical Illness Supplemental Insurance, Employee Assistance Program, and FSA Pre-Tax Commuter and COBRA benefit programs for a contract effective date of July 1st, 2025. The Group Accident and Critical Illness Supplemental Insurance contract was awarded to Securian, who is the incumbent vendor. The Employee Assistance Program contract was awarded to Health Advocate, which is a change from our current vendor of ComPsych. And the FSA Pre-Tax Commuter and COBRA contract was awarded to ASI Flex, who is also the incumbent vendor. I'm happy to report that the implementation of these new contracts is complete, and these benefits will go live on Tuesday, July 1st at the start of the plan year. Additionally, last fall, the SCBC approved a new incentive-based diabetes prevention pilot program called TheraPay through Reciprocity Health in Highmark, Delaware, which will also be launched on July 1st. Eligible state employees who are Highmark members and are at risk for developing type 2 diabetes can enroll in this program beginning July 1st and earn up to $275 for participating in the free YMCA diabetes prevention program, which also includes 4 months of a free YMCA family membership. This pilot is limited to the first 100 participants, and eligible members will begin receiving targeted communications on this program beginning next week. The SEBC will be provided regular updates on the status of this pilot, including outcomes following the conclusion of the pilot in 2026. Are there any questions on the benefit program update?
Just to interrupt a second, Controller General Miller and Lieutenant Governor Gay are both in.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Great. And just to quickly go over some legislative updates. As many of you know, Monday, June 30th is the last day of the first half of session for the 153rd General Assembly. The SBO has been monitoring and providing input on legislation that would impact the GHIP and SEBC, and will be providing a full update on legislation as an agenda item at the July SEBC meeting. For your awareness, the following bills have moved in the past few weeks. Senate Bill 12 was Senate Amendment 1, known as the Delaware Pre-Authorization Reform Act 2025, which strengthens consumer protections by reforming how insurers manage pre-authorizations, was passed by both the House and Senate and is ready for action by the governor. House Bill 56, which mandates that all individual, group, blanket, and state-regulated health plans cover medically necessary removal of excess skin and subcutaneous tissue. The SEBC is already in full compliance with this legislation as we cover these procedures as medically necessary. This bill has also passed both the House and Senate and is ready for action by the governor. Senate Substitute 1 for Senate Joint Resolution 7, which directs the SEBC to utilize specific strategies and policies when interacting and contracting with pharmacy benefit managers in order to achieve lower cost pharmaceutical drug benefit plans, was voted out of the House Administration Committee on June 25th and is now on the ready list for the House after having already passed the Senate. And lastly, Senate Substitute 1 for Senate Bill 134, which seeks to revise the definition of reverse auctions and permits the use of reverse auctions for the procurement of professional services or for related services for pharmaceutical and pharmacy benefit management services, was also voted out of House Administration Committee on June 25th and is also on the ready list for the House after having already passed the Senate. Any questions on legislative update?
Just one quick one on the removal of excess skin and subcutaneous tissue,
Yes.
et cetera. You say we already cover that.
Yes.
When medically necessary, does this change the definition?
No, it does not.
Okay.
It does not.
Karen Peterson.
I have a question, Stephanie, about Senate Bill 71.
Okay.
A birthday rule where you can opt out of a Medicare supplement plan and not have to go through underwriting. And that's already through the House and the Senate as well. Do we know how that's going to affect state retirees?
That does not impact state retirees. It does not impact our title of code. And we already have, I actually already spoke to Senator Townsend a bit about this as well. We already have the ability in our plan for Medicare retirees to opt in or out of their plans during October open enrollment. So whether they opt out 1 year, they still have the opportunity to opt in the next year. And that will not change. So that bill does not impact the group health insurance plan.
But if they opt out, they have to go through underwriting to get a replacement plan. And that was kind of the thrust of the birthday rule bill, that you would not have to go through underwriting. And so my concern was, and I had written to Senator Siegfried a couple of times to say, you know, we're not policyholders, and that bill changes the policyholders. So how does that affect state retirees? And I haven't gotten an answer yet. But no, it does provide the right to opt out and not have to go through underwriting. So that's kind of the big piece of it.
It is specific to the commercial for the Medicare population outside of self-funded plans. So it, again, does not impact our
And
population.
why is it outside of the funded plans?
It was only written for that section of code. It does not impact Title 29 of code.
Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, so is it correct for our covered individuals who are 65 plus, they are not going to Medicare Advantage or Medicare Supplement, they're going to Mexico, they're going to whatever SEBC is providing. And so what the bill is talking about is those who are not self-funded, not going through that state plan, but going on their own to get either the supplement or the advantage, and going between the two doesn't affect the individuals that we cover.
That is correct,
Okay.
yes.
Any more questions regarding the director's report? All right, thank you for that, Stephanie. So moving on to agenda item number 4, which is really the heart of our discussions today with regards to requests for proposals. We have a request proposal for that we need to approve for our vision benefit RFP. And so I'll turn it over to Michelle at Willis Towers Watson.
Good afternoon, everyone. Michelle Gass at Willis Towers Watson. I'm going to walk you through the vision benefit request for proposal presentation today. So to start from an agenda standpoint, we are going to go over some context for today's discussion. So highlighting the items that we've gone through so far and then talking through next steps from today forward. Also some feedback that was received from the SCBC members based on the draft vision RFP that had been provided, and then next steps. From a context standpoint, the state's vision benefit contract that is currently with IMED will expire on June 30th, 2026. Throughout the first half of this year, the SBO and Willis Towers Watson have been working together to draft the scope of services and the RFP. During the draft of both of those documents, we also worked with the SBO to ensure employees were surveyed for their feedback on this benefit, making sure that any feedback that was received from employees was accounted for. And then during the April 25th SCBC meeting, the SCBC was provided a detailed overview of the scope of services and had the ability to provide feedback into what was presented to them. And then during the May 30th discussion for the SCBC, we also talked through in detail the vision RFP document, which had incorporated feedback that was previously provided by committee members, and then also discussed any additional questions or feedback from that RFP draft. Any feedback that had been received between the May 30th meeting and now has been incorporated into the RFP. And then we also have on the coming slides just an item that we're going to talk through that was asked on the prior discussion in May, allowing for the SCBC to have a clear answer in that area. And then the goal of today's discussion is that the SCBC can vote on approval of the RFP in order for it to get posted later this summer. Any questions before I move on to the next slide? So during our last discussion in May for the vision RFP, there was a question raised from the SCBC regarding a minimum requirement that was currently in the RFP. So that minimum requirement was stating that vendors could be disqualified if their response did not propose rates that were equivalent or better than the rates that are currently offered under the vision plan, which are in effect until July 1st, 2025. The question was raised that if there are no vendors that meet that minimum requirement, what will take place? So we did discuss in some detail, but we wanted to ensure what is in place is clearly put in front of the SCBC today to understand what would happen in this situation. So it would be up to the PRC to make a recommendation on how to proceed, and then what they recommend would then be put in front of the SCBC to approve. So by that, an example would be, but this does not mean this is exactly what would take place. The PRC could say, none of the bidders have met this minimum requirement, therefore we are deciding to allow them to move forward as long as they've met all other minimum requirements. Or they may come up with other ideas and talk that through amongst themselves and then move that forward to the SCBC for approval. So again, it's really down to the situation and the PRC being able to look at all of the information in front of them and make a recommendation to the SCBC on how they'd like to proceed. In addition to it being up to the PRC to make a recommendation, there is also documentation throughout the RFP that makes it clear to vendors what takes place if they do not meet a minimum requirement. So we wanted to highlight those areas of the RFP for the SCBC today, understanding it's a very detailed document, and we wanted to just focus specifically on those two areas. So in section 3 of the RFP where it documents required information, which is on page 6. It states that the following information shall be provided in each proposal in the order listed below. Failure to respond to any request for information within this proposal may result in rejection of the proposal at the sole discretion of the state. So this sole discretion of the state is really where it comes down to. It would be up to the PRC to make a recommendation on how to move forward in that situation. In addition, there is an attachment, which is attachment 10, RFP discrepancies, revisions, and omissions tracking chart that allows for vendors to provide in detail any discrepancies, revisions, or omissions that they would like to put forward to the state. This document and how to populate that document is reviewed in the mandatory pre-proposal meeting. So this is the SBO and Willis Towers Watson when we meet with each of the vendors to go through the requirements of the RFP following their intent to submit proposal. We talk them through how to populate this document, and it's made very clear to them that if they do have any revisions or discrepancies or omissions, as mentioned here, they need to populate those into that document and provide it to Willis Towers Watson and the SBO as we're reviewing the bids that come in from the vendors. So hopefully the documentation on this slide provides clarity for the SEBC from the prior discussion where the details are around this question. But I'm going to pause for a minute to see if there's any follow-ups regarding this question. Okay. So the next step today is for the SEBC to vote on approval for the final vision insurance RFP. So I will hand it over to, I'm guessing Stephanie and Director Maxwell to ask the SEBC for their approval.
Thank you, Michelle. I guess we're at the point here, I would just open it up if there's any last comments or revisions that people or edits that they would like to discuss prior to taking a vote. Hearing none, this is making it easy, okay. So, regarding the vision insurance benefit request for proposals, which was distributed to the committee and posted publicly for review on June 20th, would any committee member like to make a motion to approve the RFP as written to be advertised in August 2025 for anticipated contract effective date of July 1, 2026?
So moved.
I have a motion. Got a second? Can we take a roll call on this?
I can take a roll call. Yep.
Okay.
All right, so I'll start with the people in first. So I'll start with Director Maxwell,
Yes.
Paul Baumbeck,
Yes.
Karen Peterson,
Yes.
Bill Overly,
Yes.
Secretary Gordon,
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor Gay,
Yes.
Deputy State Treasurer Brennan Fountain. Still on?
Yes.
All right, Commissioner Navarro. Still on? Oh, they lost him. Okay, Director Constantino,
Yes.
Deputy State Court Administrator Ashley Tucker,
Yes.
Jeff Tashner.
Yes.
Thank you. So that motion passes. So moving on to agenda item 4B, which is the PBM RFP. And I'll turn that over to, I think, somebody at Willis Towers Watson as well, which is
Brian Halloran.
Brian
Brian.
Hunt,
Yep. Thank you, Brian.
Sure, thank you. Appreciate it there, Michelle. So there were a number of requested updates since last we met to the PBM RFP. Some we discussed on our prior meeting on 6/13, and some came in after the fact from committee members. So I'm going to go through each of them, and if anyone has any further questions or comments or concerns, please just chime in. Okay, The first two here we discussed on the previous call. They were around the thresholds for the commercial and egg whip for bidders as far as member count goes. And the way the discussion went was to remove them from the minimum requirements and place them into the questionnaire. So we move forward with that change. Any concerns with that or comments? Okay, I think we can move to the next here. Okay, the next one, number 3, was around in the minimum requirements about requesting an acquisition cost or cost plus pricing proposal. And we just updated the language per SCBC member recommendation to further define acquisition cost pricing. So added some additional language there, specifically says that includes the elimination of spread pricing as defined as any difference between the amount paid by the state and the amount reimbursed to the pharmacy for all prescription claims. We also kind of tightened up the language there at the bottom here to say failure to submit pricing proposal as described above may result in disqualification of the bidder, just to ensure that we get the proposals we're asking for. Just a note, in the 2020 RFP, we did have this as a minimum requirement and just asked bidders to submit cost plus proposals if they were asked for. And at that time, these type of pricing models for the most part weren't fully baked out, so the PRC did not ask for any, so we didn't move forward with any of them. But where the market is today, we feel that we can get these proposals and kind of need to see them, so kind of tightened up that language.
Hey, Brian, let's take a pause here. I have a couple of questions. Karen Peterson?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Why don't we say will result in disqualification? I mean,
Stephanie,
we make it a requirement.
that was updated. Stephanie Hartos, I'm not sure where that update came from, but I did see it was changed within the RFP. Not sure if you recall where that came from.
Yes, so I would defer to, I believe our DAG, Michelle Whalen, is on. My understanding is that is standard GSS template language, that it may result in disqualification, and that language at the top of the minimum requirements was not subject to modification, so it was carried throughout. But I would ask for Michelle Whalen to confirm that.
I believe that's the case. I can confirm and then quickly chime back in if you'll give me a few moments.
Chairman, my second question would be, is there any reason why it cannot be changed to will or shall? Because it was in the 2020 RFP and nobody responded. And nobody took it seriously, obviously. I'd like to have them take it seriously this time.
May I present? Stephanie Hartis, State My Benefits. You're referring to the cost plus model proposal?
Yes.
So we did verify that for those who had submitted a bid in 2020, they responded that they would provide a cost plus model upon request. And after further review, the proposal review committee in 2020 did not request that cost plus model. There was more of an interest in the transparency models. So all of the bidders did say upon application that they would submit a cost plus model if requested. It was never requested, unfortunately, by the PRC.
But wasn't that in the RFP? The language was in the RFP?
The language in the RFP was to provide a cost plus model upon request, and
upon request.
All bidders agreed to that they would provide it upon request. Unfortunately, at that time, the PRC was more interested in a transparent model as opposed to cost plus. They were still relatively new, so it was never requested. But all vendors did say they would provide it. It was just not requested.
Okay, but in this case, we're asking for it. But then it says you may result in disqualification. If we're asking for it, why would it say may instead of shall?
I guess just, and I'd love to hear from other committee members, is like, I think the goal of this committee as we've been developing this RFP is to widen the funnel. And if we say you will be if you don't provide this, what if nobody provided? Then we'd be left with no vendors. So I'm more comfortable with saying it may instead of it definitely will, because I don't want to limit ourselves to the conversation as far as if people aren't providing it, say the ones that do provide it, but if others wouldn't have been disqualified, it would have been a better deal for us to evaluate. So I kind of don't want to take the language and say you will automatically be withdrawn from the process. And I would love to hear from others as to if they have shared the same viewpoint.
I would agree with you based on that
Okay.
explanation.
Lieutenant Governor, you have a question up, your hand up?
I was just making sure that I echoed those comments, and I believe we need flexibility going into a potential contract negotiation.
And just to confirm,
may-
this is Michelle Whalen. I can confirm that while of course the SEBC can make the RFP say what it wishes, that language is in fact standard from the state's template. And I also echo Director Maxwell's reasoning for keeping the flexibility in there, and I guess also emphasize that the state retains the sole discretion as to whether to disqualify any vendor under that same language.
Love that.
And I'll just add the additional factor of the 15% of the draft scoring criteria and weighting for audit rights, transparency, net cost, and flexibility is another way that even if they squeeze in, they can get dinged by the PRC for not doing that or doing it in an unacceptable way.
Any other discussion on that particular topic?
Yes.
Bill Oberly.
Thank you. Bill Oberly. I was more focused on the cost plus pricing proposal and a definition, and I may be getting ahead of myself because I think that my concerns may be addressed in an attachment 25 or 35.
35, attachment
35. So without that further definition, I would like to see it encompassed in this language, but I think I, again, may be ahead of myself. Right.
Brian, can you weigh in on this as to what Bill's question is?
Yes, so later on, we do request the top 50 specialty and non-specialty medications for the state and acquisition cost, and there it does break down all the pricing components that lead to net costs. So your acquisition cost, your rebates, any admin fees, any markup, hopefully not forgetting anything here, but we listed out every pricing component. Mr. Oberly, not sure if that would fulfill what you're looking for there. We also have somewhat of a description of net cost in the scoring criteria.
I think it's addressed in 35, but when we get there, I'll take a second look at it. And just one comment, Mike. Seems to me it begs the question on this PRC is going to be one of the more important ones we go through. So I would encourage my fellow SEBC members to consider serving on the PRC, because I think to get from A to B, you need some historical perspective as you go through this process.
Okay.
As painful as that is for me.
Steve Constantino?
Yeah, and for those who haven't been part of one of these processes, it's not unusual that as we're going through these bids to have a lot of questions and clarifications and ask for information. So we still reserve that right as we go through all of these bids.
Thank you, Steve. Is there any other questions that hand raised? Okay, we can move on. Brian?
Okay, yep. Next item was number 4, and that was around rebate contracting and access to those rebate contracts. The recommendation was to update the language there. So we add it to the end of the kind of definition, or at the highest level of access as allowed by vendor agreement with rebate aggregator. The recommendation was to remove this from the minimum requirements and move to the questionnaire. So we move forward with that.
Paul Bonback?
Yeah, that language at the very end of as allowed by vendor agreement with rebate aggregator, it feels like it gives an incentive to the PBMs to throw language in to make it unexplorable by the state of Delaware, and it really a disincentive for transparency. And I would, in a perfect world, I'd like to see language that they have to jump through hoops rather than we have to jump through hoops. I've got no problem, and I think it's completely proper to have confidentiality requirements by the state of Delaware for looking at this or by our auditor. But it feels like we're leading with an escape hatch to the applicants, and that doesn't give me warm fuzzies that I'd like to have.
Bill Overly? Yeah, Bill Overly. My recollection was this language was added to broaden the possibilities of those who might bid, rather than the big 2 or 3 out there. I mean, that was my recollection of why this language was added. And since it's fully auditable, I mean, I don't have a problem with the language as it's currently proposed. But if it does broaden the base of those who would compete for the business. Is my recollection correct or incorrect in terms of why that was?
That's correct from my standpoint, because some of the smaller PBMs rely on the rebate aggregators but don't own them, so they might not have access to that level of reporting. So we're kind of trying to open it up and see what the response from the vendors were.
Can you explain that or on the next to last line? So it says it's fully auditable, or at the highest level of access as allowed by the vendor agreement. Under what condition is the first clause applying, and under which conditions is the second clause applying?
So the first part, fully auditable, sorry, with up to 20 pharmaceutical manufacturers would be if the aggregator did have direct access to the agreements with the pharma manufacturer. And if that's not allowed, that we could audit the highest level that they are allowed, which would maybe be just a rebate agreement with the aggregator, not the actual pharma manufacturer.
So that situation will not have full auditability.
No, not the highest level of access, but we were trying to keep it open, as Mr. Oberly said.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions there or comments? Okay.
Brian, I just wanted to request, can Carol, is she able to unmute Kristen McKee? She okay.
I'm good now. It just
okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, you can flip slides. Yep. Okay, next one, number 5, was we had in there to confirm that your organization has experience in providing PBM management services for large municipalities, state governments, or has similar experience in depth and scope of services in the private sector. We had this as a minimum requirement previously, and the recommendation was to remove that. We do have this language included in the scope of services, though. Any questions there? Okay, the next item was around being licensed in the state of Delaware, and this was kind of repetitive in what we had in other sections. So the recommendation was to also remove that from the minimum requirements. Any questions there? Okay, next item, there was a suggestion made by a committee member to add some language around the vendor's willingness to allow basically carve out of administration and fulfillment of specific drug classes, in particular GLP-1s, to be carved out to another vendor if the state found that more advantageous. So the recommendation was to add the language there on the left column into the questionnaire. Any comments there? Okay. Next one was in the minimum requirements. We had on one of them a little section, please also provide additional detail of large and complex clients you currently service, including experience managing pharmacy benefits for clients in the public sector. This one wasn't in context of the other minimum requirements, so the recommendation was to move it to the questionnaire. The rest of the minimum requirements are kind of yes/no confirms. This was asking for details, so the recommendation was move it to the questionnaire. If there are no comments there, for this next one, in the professional services section, this is around references that we're asking for. So the previous language stated asking for 6 references, 3 current and 3 previous customers of similar scope and value. Because in the minimum requirements, we're only requiring them to have 3 clients with similar scope and services, we lowered the number of references from 6 to 3, 2 of which being current and 1 of which being expired.
So Brian, just to that one, I think we received additional feedback just to remove the word "and value." I think it's just similar scope.
Oh, yeah.
So we will get to that in our separate document, but I just want to highlight, so like I just want to address it. We will talk about it again when we read off our final vote, but I just want to highlight that right now.
Yep. Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay. If no comments on that one, we can move to the next, which is similar here regarding the references in Appendix A6. But for this one, we also updated the number of references to more closely align with the minimum requirements. But we removed, we had references with an excess of 40,000 eligible employees. So since we're not requiring that in the min bid requirements, we had that language removed. That also has scope and value. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go.
That one that's up on the screen right now, it had a 3, I think, in the draft RFP. So like, it's not being referenced. You just referenced it, but I just want to make sure everybody understands that the language that was in the RFP that was circulated as a draft did have that number 3 where it says references with excess of 40,000 in the previous language. That's what you guys actually saw, but subsequent to that, there was a recommendation to take that out in the effort to widen the funnel.
Correct.
Continue.
Okay. Next one here, we have the previous language, and this is again around the references. We just updated the number from 6 to 3, 2 active, 1 terminated. Just also to call your attention, we do have language in the reference section that says, if possible, at least 1 current reference should be a public sector client, though this is not a requirement. Since it's not mandatory, I believe the thought here was to leave it in, but definitely open to any comments or discussion from the committee if there's concerns there.
The language of it would be preferable that at least 1 current reference be a public sector client be clearer. It's an affirmative statement of what we'd like, as opposed to there's this that we don't require, which does seem like only a half involved statement. It's preferred that.
Yeah. Any concerns with that?
I believe he's suggesting that we change the verbiage to.
It is preferred that.
It is preferred that at least 1 current reference should be a public sector client.
Period.
Chairman Maxwell, Jeff Tashner here. I have a question for Brian on this.
Go for it, Mr. Tashner.
So, thank you, sir. Brian, am I correct that in the interview process, if we leave this as is, and a vendor does not give us a public sector reference, we can ask them if they have any clients that are public sector? And
Definitely,
then,
yeah.
and if they say, yeah, they do, but then that can raise the question is, why didn't you provide them to us since we're public sector? So, I mean, I'm comfortable with this language, knowing that we have the ability to explore this and dig deeper in the interview process.
From my standpoint, that you could definitely go that route. Yeah.
Thank you.
Satisfied? Okay, thank you.
Okay. Moving to the next section here. So on the last call, we talked about getting together a request for the top 50 specialty and non-specialty medications for the state by plan spend and asking the bidders to provide some metrics around that. And we did put together that request. Michelle, you can flip to the next slide there. So the way that directions read for this is, for the commercial bid, please complete attachment 35, which is the commercial top 50 specialty and non-specialty drug pricing with 30-day supply acquisition cost, markup, admin fee, actual rebate, and corresponding net cost. Provide these actual cost and rebate metrics as of August 1st, 2025, assuming dispensing through your mail order and specialty channel proposed in your offer. Describe any assumptions and caveats associated with your completion of this pricing grid. So there we listed out the top 50 specialty and non-specialty drugs according to cost for the state, and just asked the bidders to fill that in. The reason why it has a date is because drug pricing can change throughout the year. So we try to make it as apples to apples as we can there and just uncover every pricing component that contributes to net cost. So that's what we came up with. Do we have any comments on that, or anyone want to see revisions done or updates made there?
Go over.
Yeah, again, I referenced this earlier, and I may be ahead of the curve again as relates to attachment 35, but I had submitted a recommendation that the definition of net cost be the ingredient cost minus all discounts plus dispensing fees minus rebates plus administrative fees. Now, this captures some of it. I don't know how far we want to go in terms of defining net cost, but that's really what we're all about, I think, in this process.
Kristen, I don't know if you might be able to weigh in here. I think typically we wouldn't see a discount in an acquisition cost pricing model, but maybe you could weigh in here with what we're seeing from the market.
Correct. And so what we're really basing this off of the cost plus pricing arrangement makeup, where we would expect that a PBM would have a set acquisition price, but then typically we see a markup because they don't provide everything at cost. So we'd see the acquisition cost, the markup, admin fee or dispensing fee with the rebate. So all of those going into a net cost. If we were looking at the transparent arrangement, similar to what you have, that's where we would have kind of the starting point would more typically be an AWP. And that's where then we'd have the discount and dispensing fee and the rebate come into play. So it's really that front terminology just is a little bit different between the two types of pricing offers.
Okay, so you're comfortable that in a net cost environment, this language gets us to that endpoint?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Thank you.
Simple question.
On that.
For the mail order stuff, is 30 days the only amount, or are there also 90-day? And is it worthwhile to also ask for 90-day in case there's a different cost point there.
Kristen, do you have any feedback on that?
Yeah, and that would probably be more so in the AWP discount guarantees, so that wouldn't really get to acquisition pricing. We chose 30-day here since we tend to see kind of a mix between 30 and 90 and somewhere in between. But that was a way to just normalize the day supply so we didn't have apples and oranges here.
Thank you.
Any other comments on that one? Okay. In that case, we can move to the next section, which was around the joint resolution that we talked about on a previous meeting. And we
Can we
did
just pause
receive,
for a second?
Yeah.
This materials went out in advance.
Okay.
If it's the will of the committee to go line by this, I'll adhere to that. But if not, I don't know if we all need to, this is informational purposes, and I'm not sure if there's anything that we would have to take action on with regards to this information in front of us. Does anybody feel differently from the committee? Or did anybody have a question about the material that was presented?
I guess my question on point 2
Okay.
is, what if the legislature creates something that's not called the P&T committee, where that's where the suggested language was such as, but in the proposed language, it's explicitly a pharmacy and therapeutics committee. I felt like we're tying hands a little bit there for the legislature. My thought is that a more general approach, if the legislature asks for a digging into it and they call something else, I'd like to make sure the language we have covers that.
we could update that and kind of open that language up a little bit. Maybe in the suggested language, as you just said, make it an organization such as a P&T committee.
Great.
Okay.
We just make that note so we can make sure that gets voted on. Does anybody have objection to that change? Because we're gonna try to read that in at some point. Anybody have any other questions about these points? If not, I would like to move forward. Seeing no objection, we're going to move forward. I guess brings us to the scoring criteria.
Yes, slide 17. So there were no major updates here. We just added net cost to the second line from the lowest. So under audit rights, transparency / net cost and flexibility. And this was from a recommendation from SCBC member and included a definition of net cost at the bottom there too. And that was the only change to the scoring criteria.
Mr. Tashner, I see you contemplating there.
Well, I shared my thoughts with you and Stephanie. I understand the response I got back because we're dealing with PBMs and not with manufacturers. It's still frustrating, and I'm hopeful that we're actually getting at net cost. Just feel like this whole industry has been built in a way that prevents us from getting the information we need to make the most responsible decisions for ourselves, for the plan members, for the taxpayers of Delaware. So I think what we're doing here is a good first step. I just hope it's not the final step. And even once this RFP goes out, and like Bill said, a number of us sit on the PRC and we get this, we still have a lot more work to do in the future to really get a handle on pharmaceutical costs. So it was more, good first step, but I hope there's a lot more steps behind this, Brian.
Thank you for that. Paul Baumbat?
Yeah, this is attachment 35 that's referenced here. I don't see it on the website, the SCBC website. I don't recall, and easily I could have missed it. How do I find it?
It was embedded in the RFP itself. It wasn't a separate Excel spreadsheet, so it was a part of the full document.
I had that up and I didn't see it. Do you know page number? Of the 256 page thing?
They all ran together after a while. That's where I saw it, but I couldn't recall where I saw it.
In 1 moment, I
Sure.
can share that.
The attachment.
Attachment 35.
35.
Here.
Which is the definition that I submitted.
Stephanie, do you want me to pull it up on the screen to
It's
share?
232, page 232. I had
Yep.
a different PM up. Is it attributed to you then? Okay. Yes. Thank you.
Pull it up.
Michelle, can you pull it up and share it on the screen, page 232 of the draft
Yep.
RFP?
Of course.
Do you see it now, Paul?
Yeah, yep, I got it. It's actually 3 pages, 232 to 234.
Yes. Pretty good now?
I'm very good. on that.
All right. We're good then. We can, thank you.
Okay. And that brings us to the end of the slide deck for the PBM RFP. Director Maxwell, did you still want to go through the updates that were made? I know Stephanie sent out that separate PDF. A lot of that we did go through already, but there may be 1 or 2 further updates that were made that weren't covered in this deck.
I think we can do that through the vote. I think everybody has that PDF that was circulated. I apologize that some of the last minute changes were the calls of the chair. He's been busy doing other things that he's required to do statutorily, but hopefully they weren't too burdensome to catch up on, and they were minor corrections, I believe. Yeah.
Just one aside, I had raised the issue and I didn't get any feedback. Again, my concern about raising the ladder on those that might participate, and on the 100 drugs that we've listed, I suggested perhaps we include language that would allow for a clinically appropriate biosimilar drug in the event that the PBM does not have access to that medication.
Yeah, not sure if anyone else has feedback on that. So in other words, just for an example, if we listed out Humira on the top 50 sheet and
yeah, I used Stelara as an example.
okay, so Stelara, maybe the bidder is not dispensing this Stelara, doesn't have access, and they prefer a biosimilar instead, correct?
Would
Or
they
have
be,
access to a
they-
biosimilar instead?
yeah, would they be allowed to do that? I guess is my question.
Kristen,
this
maybe
draft-
if you wanted to weigh in, maybe that would be captured
Sure.
in the caveats if that wasn't something that they were dispensing or providing, that maybe we could update the directions to filling out the top 50 to include that.
We could, because that is one that's in the historical data, but could change in the future, and certainly will change by August. So we could add a column that also says, if you are not dispensing the current drug, note which drug you are dispensing and which those costs align with. So we could update that in the header and in the column.
That resolves my issues. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Did you have your hand up, Paul? Karen?
yeah, is there any provision buried in these 253 pages that requires that the PBM, when a generic drug comes out and the PBM is buying the more expensive version, is there a time period specified in terms of when they would have to switch to the lower cost drug? I mean, obviously the rebates are higher on the brand name drug. How long do they have to switch that to, say, less expensive generic.
Okay, so if there's a brand drug being dispensed and a generic equivalent is approved, the time period in which they are required to begin preferring the generic instead of the branded medication, correct? I don't believe we have an exact timeline outlined for that. From my experience, usually the PBM, we do ask for lowest net cost on all products within the RFP. I don't believe that we outline a specific time period though that in which they would have to start preferring the generic, but we do ask about lowest net cost and driving the lowest net cost. If there's some specific language that you want it included in there, we could draft something up though.
Yeah, because what would be the incentive if the rebate is higher on the brand drug? What would be the incentive for them to drop to the less expensive generic, thereby saving the retiree or the insured some money? I mean, would like 60 days be reasonable?
I know in some circumstances, these types of changes might have to run through the vendor's own P&T committee, where they are weighing the cost of the drug with the rebate versus the cost of the new generic medication. So maybe some language along the lines of if a generic equivalent is available, that you will prefer the lower net cost product, something like that, and maybe outline a time period there.
Can we pause 1 second? Could it be a question that we ask of the proposal, the party that's proposing, as to please describe your process when a drug becomes more cost effective than one that you're currently supplying? Can we ask that question as to what their process and timeline for implementation? Because I don't know if there's a requirement of a contract, because it doesn't sound like there's language as far as contract requirements, but it'd be a question that we could have the subcommittee, the review committee, to be reviewing as to what the response is from the parties.
Because I just read an article last week, I didn't bring it with me, but it was talking about how PBMs will drag their feet for up to a year after a generic becomes available because they're getting a higher rebate. So why hurry up and drop to the generic? So that would be good if we could get an idea of how long it takes them to.
So unfortunately, due to our compliance requirements, like whatever we had to vote on this today, so if we can just come up with some agreement as to what that question is. So it sounds like Stephanie's drafting something right now.
The question would be for the PRC to execute that question as opposed to put it into the RFP.
No, it's going to go in the RFP.
Okay, fine. Okay,
for their review. It's got to be in the document, right?
Okay.
But instead of, like, I think Karen was asking, is there a contractual requirement for implementation? And so I don't think we have that existing language. So I think we turn it into a question so we can see the framework as to the process. Stephanie, do you have something for us to, not to vote on, but just to hear in advance on?
Yes, absolutely. So recommended to include in the questionnaire stating, please describe your process and timeline of preferring a generic or biosimilar when available for a brand name drug.
Does that make sense? Okay.
Yes.
I have a question. I didn't know to ask this question. The Vision RFP slide deck included 4 vendors that they were planning to invite. I didn't see that for the PBMs, and I think I've raised this in past meeting. I've seen, it seems like there's 6 operating at 3% or more of market share in the country, 3 that are in single digits and 3 that are 20 to 35% share. And I'd like to see, wherever it's appropriate, for there to be an inclusion of all the top 6 in the invite list. I don't know when that's done and how that's done.
Or Stephanie Harness, I can jump in here. I believe it may have been included in an earlier meeting related to the scope of services. That's typically discussed prior to the development of the full RFP. However, there is very much an ability for us to provide to you all the list of who we are inviting to bid on this RFP prior to posting that and solicit feedback. to my understanding, would not be subject to a vote, as it will be posted publicly for all PBMs to bid on if they feel appropriate. So we could very much share that with the committee. And if you have any suggestions for who else to include that may not be on that list, we can include that as well.
Just technical question, because I saw that, Paul called that up to me, and I've seen that as well around the vision. I mean, do we actually limit those who can participate?
No, we do
When you
not.
say invited, it sounds like we're circling the wagons and limiting those who are invited to bid.
Sure, and I would actually ask for WTW to provide a little more insight on that process. It is not limiting any bidders who are qualified. WTW, can you provide a little more context as to who is typically selected to be invited to bid on an RFP and why some versus others?
I'm happy to chime in here, Brian, if that helps, just at overall, but if you want to speak to PBM specifically, please feel free to jump in. So in general, with the RFP process, we work together with the SBO and then during the meetings with the SCBC to understand the interest of the RFP and the scope of work, and then internally review who we see as fit vendors for this scope. And within Proposal Tech, which is the tool that we use to post the RFPs, we have the ability to send out an invitation to them, which pretty much means they receive a link and the ability to access Proposal Tech and register and get themselves entered into the RFP process. However, as Stephanie made mention, this is also public, which means it will be available for any vendor to go in, and we do not limit any of those vendors that were not officially sent an invite email to go into the system, register themselves, and also participate in the process as long as they follow the steps required throughout the RFP. I also can just hand over to Brian. I don't know if you have anything to add specific to PBM before I stop there.
No, that sounded to mirror my understanding, just that it's open to anyone. And if there are specific bidders that you want us to contact or want to list, then we could certainly provide that, as Stephanie said. But as far as I'm concerned, I thought it was open to everyone.
No, I'm not questioning it.
Yeah, I'm just concerned we're talking about who we're specifically inviting. Like to me, this should be an open thing. And if we were specifically reaching out to a party, I would get concerned that we were given preferential treatment too.
But that's what the Vision RFP slide deck has. It lists 4 particular vendors.
Isn't that who we think are going to respond, or is that who we're definitely inviting? Can somebody address that?
Here's a list of vendors WTW would recommend be invited.
Yeah, that's the way it was phrased, which bothered me, and I want to make sure we don't do that with the PBM.
How do the other vendors know?
Well, they're in the business, right? So they're looking for solicitations. In the day of AI these days, they probably have things that go out and search websites as to solicitation.
Do we advertise?
WTW just mentioned that they do send it out through a portal of.
So I will note it is hosted through GSS as well, Government Support Services, the state's procurement process.
That's
So just going on that thing on the internet, I just saw there are 6 that, are typically listed as the top 6 CVSs. In that list, I will give them the order they were given to me of Caremark CVS, Cigna, Express Scripts, United Health, which is, I can't read my own writing, Optum, Humana, MedImpact, and Prime Therapeutics. So I just, am hoping that we do it, if we're doing a special.
Please be careful when navigating around the trash can. That's so kindly volunteered to be, or.
Steve, you're not muted.
Funny.
I just want to make sure we don't only invite 3.
Then
Okay.
Understood. And again, we'd be happy to share a list prior to invite if the request of the committee is to not send any direct invites for this or any procurements. We can discuss that as well. I do also want to note our contracts manager just also informed me that on the Government Support Services website, vendors have the ability to sign up for notifications for certain types of procurements that are posted. So there is also a process through the state where they may be notified if a new RFP is posted that we do not engage with the process. It would be up to the vendor to sign up for that.
Mr. Chairman, I would like Navigis added. to the list.
Absolutely.
I know they bid last time also. But I mean, they were the ones who did the Montana, was it?
Absolutely. So I think for a takeaway for our office, once we get the final decision on the RFP and determine what PBMs with WTW's expertise may meet this criteria, we can send that list to the committee. Any additional feedback can be shared. It wouldn't be subject to a vote, so that can be handled internally. Yes.
Trust me, these people know these are coming out. I mean, if there's a job posted on a website, you have so many recruiters reaching out to you saying, I'd love to help you fill that position. It's similar to an RFP process. So I'm fairly confident that those that have an intention to bid will know about this.
That's part of their demonstrated expertise.
Yes.
And most companies do have staff that track these type of opportunities across the list.
Thank you.
Anybody have any further discussion around that point? Great. So I think we're at a point where we would vote on the RFP as drafted with changes that were in the PDF, unless you have other recommendations.
Mr. Chair, this is
Karen.
what I've raised before, and I didn't agree with the
Response you got?
Exactly. So I'm gonna try this again. And it's under scope, on page 5. And it says, trying to say, but I don't get to see what it actually says, which is, the SCBC seeks a pharmacy benefit management partner to duplicate the prescription drug plan designs in place as of July 1, 2021. And while part of that is true, we may not want to duplicate that plan. So I would suggest, but I was told that the real point of that was to retain control over decision making and plan customization, blah, blah, blah. Well, if that's the point of it, why can't we amend it to say that instead of duplicate the plan we have now, which is not necessarily what we want. We might want a whole different kind of plan. So the language I would suggest for that sentence is the SCBC seeks a pharmacy benefit management partner who will continue to honor the state of Delaware's right to maintain decision-making control over the administrative or clinical management of its pharmacy benefits program.
So I'm just hearing this for the first time, which is fine. I'm just saying, can we just strike the first sentence and just say the state of Delaware is not interested in contracting for an arrangement that would force the state to give up any just
Absolutely.
like, I don't see the point. I mean, I don't see the point in the value add of that statement, except unless the intention is to get exactly what we have today, which I don't think is the will of this committee, is what I've heard to date.
Stephanie Hardis, Statewide Benefits Office. The intention of the language that's currently drafted states to duplicate the prescription drug plan benefit designs, not the plan itself. However, Karen, after I did receive your comment as well this morning, and was able to quickly consult with Willis Towers Watson, and there was a recommendation to revise that language to state the SCBC seeks a pharmacy benefit management partner to closely replicate the prescription drug benefit plan designs in place as of July 1st, 2025 to ensure minimal disruption in member experience and clinical oversight, as that's where the design specifically is relating to.
Yeah, but the replicate is closely related to duplicate. So I don't know why, as you said, just strike the first sentence completely.
I'm just reacting to it. I want to hear from others as to what their thoughts on that, but I would be comfortable, but I want everybody else to be comfortable that we just would not have that first sentence, because I think it's, to your point, a little over prescriptive, and it's almost sounding like we're not open to something different.
Other designs.
Yeah. Does that, Stephanie, I'll ask you as director as SBO, does that create heartburn for you?
The intention of the duplicating plan design is specific to not minimizing disruption for the members. However, I would defer to Willis Towers Watson and again, if it's the will of the committee, we can absolutely strike that line. I would just maybe ask Brian or Kristen if they have any concerns with any impact to the members or the clinical oversight that we currently require in our plan design.
Just, I thought the purpose of that language was more to preserve the plan design that you have in place today. So say if a vendor didn't have the capability to give $0 diabetic supplies, or to have members pay one copay if they get multiple diabetic prescriptions on one day, if they don't have those capabilities, that may cause some amount of disruption for members. I just, definitely open to kind of loosening the language, but I just was thinking the purpose of it was a little different than pricing components and things like that, and more around the actual plan design and preserving that, like more around the member out of pocket cost share and clinical programs that are supporting them. That's the way that I was looking at it. Just my 2 cents.
So let me just have dialogue. So like when they describe their scope of services to us in their response, won't we be able to determine that this is totally different than our plan that we currently have today? Like, that's really what, I mean, they're not gonna make a statement that says we duplicate what you have today, right? I don't think that's gonna be the response.
That is correct.
I think they're gonna describe the scope of service that they're proposing as a solution for us. And so that's what I'm struggling with. Steve, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I think it's the wording. I think we should just say that, whoever can say this in the proper way, but you're really concerned about disruption between one plan to another plan potentially, right? So I would say, putting something in, the bidder has to guarantee minimum disruption as they're putting forward their proposal. All right, now that is a little more general, but I think you're right, Brian. I think when they see those words, they're going to say, they're asking for all these new things in the RFP, but they want us to duplicate. I think that just causes a lot of confusion.
What if we take, Stephanie, just strike the part about the plan design, but do you're looking for a PBM partner and seeking a minimum disruption and a continuation of therapeutic or whatever the words you had in there.
And then it doesn't say duplicate or replicate.
Right. Yeah.
Good.
Sure. So just based on what I'm hearing, recommended language to state, the SCBC seeks a pharmacy benefit management partner for prescription drug benefit plan services effective July 1st, 2025, with minimal disruption to member experience.
When it's about the clinical, wasn't there another phrase in there? The language you would.
Was it clinical
To ensure-
oversight, maybe?
Ensuring minimal disruption in member experience and clinical oversight.
Yeah.
Yep.
That seems to catch.
And we'll read through all those again
Yeah.
prior to the vote taking.
Steve, you have your hand up again, or is that?
No, I don't.
Okay. Is there any other discussion on this particular matter?
Just
Locally.
much to your chagrin.
I think I've been.
No, you have been, and I appreciate it. On the draft scoring, and I really was ambivalent around the cost issue, but you can't disconnect the cost issue from the transparency and audit rights. And, I've been mulling this over in my mind all last night about whether the audit rights and transparency, net cost and flexibility ought to be higher than 50%, but I don't know where you would take.
I struggled with the same thing, so I literally said, where are we gonna
Yeah,
devalue something, and
Right.
I couldn't come to a
I
conclusion.
couldn't either, but I just wanted to call it out as a concern. Well, so.
Do we have any other comments before we try to work through a motion? And I just want to take a moment to thank everybody on the committee who provided feedback, review this. I appreciate it. As we all know, this is a process, and this is probably not the end of a journey that we're all on to find a better solution that obviously increases transparency and accountability as far as resources for taxpayers and members of our plan.
Just one further question before we follow the question.
So,
On the GLP-1 potential carve-outs, I assume that would result in the state having the option to direct contract. Is that correct, or am I assuming too much?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
we'll try this again. I think we're getting close to a motion. Do we have any other discussion prior to us trying to work through a motion? Are you gonna try to manage this? You want to?
Yeah, I can read through. I did just one outstanding item I still had was related to the business references. The recommendation to remove the term and value when referencing scope.
Yeah,
Was shared in the document yesterday.
we talked about that when I made a point to mention it when Brian was going through it, and I think it showed up in two different
Yes.
instances. So I just want full clarification. And we struck number 3 out. It was in the draft RFP, but I don't think it was mentioned in the feedback here. So I just wanted to be clear on that as well.
Great, so the motion would be to approve the pharmacy benefit management RFP as submitted and posted publicly on June 20th, 2025 with the following revisions. Page 8, minimum requirement number 13, removal of the sentence, please also provide additional detail of the large and complex clients you currently service, including experience managing pharmacy benefits for clients in the public sector, and moving this to the questionnaire. Page 19, update language regarding business references for the following. Provide 3 business references consisting of 2 current and 1 previous customer of similar scope using attachment 5. Include business name, mailing address, contact name and phone number, numbers of years doing business with, and the type of work performed. Personal references cannot be considered. State of Delaware personnel may not be used as references. Page 235, Appendix A. Update language regarding business references to the following. 1 completed business reference form, see attachment 5. Please provide references other than state of Delaware contacts. Form must be included. Your company must have proven ability to perform the services described in this RFP. Of your company's current clients, please list 2 or more references of similar scope. Additionally, please provide references for 1 terminated and or expired clients and note the date of termination and or expiration with the reason. Page 236, Appendix A, update language regarding business references to the following. The total of 3 references requested should include at least 2 active and 1 terminated reference to be procured through this competitive RFP process. If possible, at least 1 current reference should be a public sector client, though this is not a requirement. For each reference, indicate any involvement by staff members who will be servicing the state's accounts in the event of contract award. For references from clients with expired contracts, there are no timing restrictions on how recently this reference and your company terminated the contractual relationship. Please ensure all references provided in your response include valid contact information, examples name, phone number, email address, etc., and are aware that they will be contacted during the RFP evaluation process. A proposed revision for criteria weight, page 22. Audit rights, transparency, net cost, and flexibility. Adding the term ability to go above and beyond requested audit rights and transparency terms as stated in the minimum bid requirements, removing the words be compliant with. Questionnaire revisions. Adding, describe your willingness to allow the administration and fulfillment of specific drug classes, including GLP-1s, to be carved out to another vendor. Adding, please confirm your organization's ability to provide the state with access to all pricing data necessary to derive net cost of state prescription claims in real time. Adding, please confirm that your organization will support an organization such as a Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee, P&T Committee, working solely on behalf of the SEBC to develop a formulary designed to provide an ongoing review of all the medications contracted by the SEBC. Adding, given that low-cost providers and pharmacies, examples Civica, Mark Cuban Cost Plus Drugs, GoodRx, continue to come to market, confirm how you will allow members to access drugs through these more affordable suppliers and pharmacies, especially in situations where the member can determine your price is significantly higher. Updating page 123, contractual provisions and other legal requirements, bullet 4, to state, confirm the ability and flexibility to join state of Delaware or an interstate compact if the state chooses to join other states with a strategy for direct contracting of select drugs with select manufacturers. Technical revisions. Page 3, removing 11 a.m. from RFP released row. Page 7, minimum requirement number 3, change attachment 1 to attachment 32. Page 28, section 5, licenses and permits. Revised second paragraph to say, by October 1st, 2025, the PBM shall either furnish the state of Delaware with proof of state of Delaware business licensure or authorization attained through the Delaware Department of Insurance, or both as applicable, to align with provisions made to minimum requirement number 10. Page 45, attachment 28, QB7 report, add confidential NDA required sub-bullet. To attachment 35, add column to allow documentation of biosimilars if the PBM does not carry the drug documented in attachment 35. Adding to the questionnaire, please describe your process and timeline of preferring a generic or biosimilar when available for a brand name. Revising page 5 to state, the SEBC seeks a pharmacy benefit management partner for prescription drug benefit services effective July 1st, 2025, with minimal disruption in member experience and clinical oversight. That is the conclusion of the proposed revisions.
All about that.
Okay, on page 1 of this thing.
Yes.
One time you talk about previous clients, once terminated and or expired and once terminated. Is there a reason for the 3 different descriptions of past clients?
And we can use terminated and or expired for all 3.
I think that'd be better.
Stephanie, could you read the last sentence for me again?
The proposed revision to page 5.
It had to do with the effective date.
Okay.
I thought you said July 1, 2020.
You are correct. Let me,
Maybe yours.
so close. All right. Revision to page 5. The SEBC seeks a pharmacy benefit management partner for prescription drug benefit services effective July 1st, 2026, with minimal disruption in member experience and clinical oversight.
It's testing. You passed.
Well, that's because it said same as what was in effect July 1, 2025.
So we all had the motion read and it's been amended. So can I get a motion to approve? So I had Karen Peterson and then, so did I hear a second on the, somewhere?
I think it was secretary.
Second, Yvonne.
Second, Secretary Gordon. Any discussion?
Thank you.
No, just if I might make a comment, and I said this to you personally, Mr. Chair, I really appreciate the openness and your tolerance to try to get to this end point. I know it's not been an easy task given your duplicate responsibilities, particularly this time of year, but I do appreciate it very much.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to say thank you to that gang at that end of the table.
Yeah,
I mean, Stephanie had to step in, got it right in the middle of the process, and they've just done a superb job. I'm going to thank all of them.
Thank you so much. All right, so I'd like to call for a roll call on approval of the PBM RFP.
Right.
Please.
All right, Director Maxwell.
Yes.
Paul Wambach,
Yes.
Karen Peterson,
Yes.
Bill Oberlin,
yes.
Secretary Gordon,
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor Gay,
Yes.
Deputy State Treasurer Brendan Fountain,
Yes.
Commissioner Navarro,
Yes.
Director Constantino,
muted him from
Oh, he should be able to unmute himself now.
Kenny.
David, are you there?
He did say.
Oh, yep, perfect.
Yes,
All right. Deputy
Sorry, I
State
had
Court
some
Administrator
issues.
Ashley Tucker.
Yes.
Jeff Tasher.
Yes.
Motion
All right,
passes.
motion passes. Thank you so much. So I believe we have one more RFP to discuss, which is a draft. It's a review. So we actually are not voting on this one today, right?
Correct, that will be the July SCBC.
So I'll turn it over to Michelle to review the health data warehouse RFP.
This is actually Dave Orendorf. Dave, are you able to unmute? Double check if he. Do we see him on the line?
Now,
There we
now
go.
I am.
There you go. Okay, perfect. Let me pull up the screen for you. Here you go. Over to you, Dave.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Dave Orndorff from Willis Towers Watson. Today, I'm just going to go over what we're going to cover. We'll start for context of today's discussion. Then we're going to cover the high level RFP objectives. We're going to revisit those. We went over those on the May 30th meeting a few weeks back. We're going to talk through the feedback that we received from the SCBC members on the scope of services and how we incorporated them into the current draft of the RFP. We're going to go over a high-level outline of the RFP questionnaire, and then we're going to go ahead and talk about next steps in the process. All right. So as background, a little bit of context. Again, we should be familiar with this, but the state of Delaware engaged Willis Towers Watson to support procurement for health data warehouse services for the group health insurance programs, medical, health management, and pharmacy programs. The current contract expires on June 30th of 2026. The SCEBC will be issuing an RFP with a contract that has an effective date of July 1st, 2026. During the meeting on May 30th, the SCEBC discussed the scope of services for the upcoming data warehouse RFP and provided initial feedback to us. Today, we'll focus on the RFP, including that feedback that we obtained from committee members that's been incorporated. And any additional feedback that we received today will be incorporated into the final version of the RFP, which the committee will vote on the July 29th, 2025 SCBC meeting. All right. At this point, we'll go over the high-level RFP objectives. I won't go through each one because we did talk about those last week, but generally speaking, we want a state-of-the-art data warehouse that's going to provide an end-to-end solution that interfaces seamlessly with all the state's vendors. And the vendor partner will have the ability to troubleshoot any issues with data files. It's going to support the state's objectives to support healthcare consumerism. We need to have an excellent account management services with no loss in service or no degradation in service over today's level of service. The successful RFP candidates will commit to providing a dedicated analytic resource for supplemental support on an ongoing and ad hoc basis. They need to be able to produce timely management reporting that's meaningful. They've got to be competitive financially. They've got to be able to support an implementation seamlessly and then maintain data security outlined by the state and adhere to the contracting requirements. On the next slide, we're going to go ahead and walk through the feedback that we received from SCBC members. During the call on the 30th, the SCBC requested that a use case be incorporated into the RFP around GLP-1s, and it was added to section 12. number 17 on page 17, and it reads, please describe how you would assess the impact of GLP-1s medications and whether the use, and it's a little difficult for me to read. Okay, there it is. Of GLP-1 medications has resulted in net cost savings to the plan. Additionally, the SCBC requested a list of vendors that were invited to participate on the last RFP, which occurred in 2020. The list of vendors that submitted a bid during the last RFP, and which vendors will likely be invited to participate in this RFP. Those are all listed below. On the next slide, we'll go ahead and go over a high-level outline of the RFP questionnaire. These are the components under which the questions are organized. I won't go through them, but you can, I'll let you glance over them. And if you have any questions as you read them, please let me know. All right, at this point, we'll just go over next steps. We will ask the SCBC to provide any feedback on the RFP to the SBO by the end of the day on Monday, July 7th. The SBO and WTW will incorporate that feedback from the SCBC to the final version for the SCBC's approval. Finally, the SCBC will vote on the Health Data Warehouse RFP for approval at the July 29th SCBC meeting.
Any questions from members?
Is this,
Hold on that.
thank you. 130 pages, is this another one where we can identify which 70 pages are boilerplate, which 60 pages are ones that are more appropriate for us to examine and consider feedback for?
Stephanie Hardis, I'd be happy to send out the scope of services as well as the questionnaire and scoring components to review.
Thank you.
Any other questions from committee members?
Well, we're only on page 7. My question is actually on page 10, so unless you complete it.
Yeah, you can ask a question. I think I might have jumped the gun, but I thought we were on next steps. I thought we were to the end. Sorry.
Yeah, you can ask.
Oh, okay. The last sentence really captured my attention in terms of provision for historical data. Doesn't that data belong to the state of Delaware? I mean, there's 4 years worth of data, but we're only eligible for 2 years worth of data.
Typically, that is a constraint that is occurs from the carriers themselves, not the data warehouse. So typically what happens in an RFP, if you were to change vendors, it would be a brand new implementation, and the new data warehouse would have to go to your carriers and ask for historic data, right? So then it would be, a lot of times they'll say we can only go back for 2 years because that data is archived. At that point, they may charge you a fee to go back and, I guess, unarchive that data. At that point, maybe there's an opportunity to ask the data warehouse to cover that fee, should that arise, or to negotiate it with your carriers. But that's just an eventuality that I wanted to make sure that the committee was aware of.
Yeah, it just struck me odd that we have to go back and reconstruct our own data for 2 years. Secondly, I guess what troubled me was that it sort of gives the edge to the
if through that context it does, if 4 years of, historic data is, is a must-have. I think it's, it's a preference. It's good to have longitudinal data in some capacity, but most, things change so rapidly that generally speaking, 2 to 3 years is as far back as most people go from an analytic perspective. But the SBO did, indicate a preference to maintain that data. So I think we should be able to ask that question. And, your carriers, may not have archived that data, but some carriers do. And I just wanted to make sure that everyone is aware of that eventuality. And again, it's not like the data, generally speaking, they can go get it, but they might, try to charge a fee for that. And that's something we can negotiate either with the data warehouse, who's the new data warehouse, or with your vendors themselves.
Is there a way, I'm sorry, Stephanie, go ahead.
No, you're fine.
Is there a way to build into the RFP that the data belongs to us regardless of length of time of the contract?
That, this could be a discussion that that could take a while, and there's always a tension between the carriers and the payers, right? So the payers maintain it's their data, and then the carriers will fight and push and say, it's our data, we're administering it for you. But that's really where it comes. That's where the tension is. It's usually between the payers and the medical carriers. The data warehouses are just kind of third parties there. But where the reason, the question's usually, well, why can't you just take the data and move it to the new data warehouse? One of the things that, the first things that the carriers will do is make the data warehouses promise that we're not going to share that data. And then again, we don't want to go too far into it, but the data warehouses themselves don't want the data after it's been touched by another data warehouse. They want their own clean raw claims data. So it's generally more efficient to just get it directly from the carriers than to try to go through the disclosures to let the data warehouse release a carrier's data to a third party.
All about that.
I'm going to keep exploring this area. Are you saying that the carriers maintain, much longer periods of times data for our population, and we don't need to go to the warehouse for older data?
No. What I'm saying is that the carriers, and I don't know this, in the context of your carriers specifically. I do know, generally speaking, carriers after a certain period of time will archive data because it takes up a lot of space. And if they need to, and sometimes if we need to go back more than 2.5 to 3 years, sometimes they charge to retrieve that data. The data warehouses, once they've aggregated the data and and cleaned it and organized it the way they prefer, it's less, they maintain it indefinitely, but it's been modified and aggregated, so it doesn't lend itself to being sent to another data warehouse. They want clean, untouched, unfiltered data.
What I'm hearing so far concerns me. Given we're working on things like GLP with heart disease, diabetes, and weight, and the long-term impact on health costs, which we're directly responsible for, long-term data we need. And if there's this big barrier, a warehouse to me doesn't own the stuff in it, and to say, oh, because it's our warehouse, we're not going to give you back your stuff. I got a gigantic problem with that. I may completely misunderstand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Help me with this, please.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. So the data warehouse is they'll maintain the data for forever. Let's say, right? Where the where the concern comes in is that they are not the contracts that, you know, the agreements that they signed to promise the carriers that they're not going to share data with anybody else prohibits them from sending it to a third, you know, to a third party, to the new data warehouse, right? So you know, we could, and, you know, if it comes down to it, we could investigate relieving them of that, you know, of that promise, right? But they would have to get, you know, the carrier's approval to share that with a third party. Typically, now you've got 3 people in that legal agreement, and, you know, 4 including the state. It's generally more efficient just for the new data warehouse to go back to the carriers and say, we need 5 years, you know, plus of that data. Go ahead and retrieve that for us so we can have that history.
I would hope that between our lawyers and DTI, we'd have a way to ensure that this data, which comes from the state maintains rights to it. And I completely understand confidentiality and all this sort of stuff. I got to believe there's a solution, a data and a legal solution to this issue, such that the SEBC can maintain access to longitudinal data that will be driving our future costs and decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, you know, that, you know, this is something you can negotiate with your carriers, like not to archive it, you know, or, you know, to work with, you know, going forward, if, you know, in a new contract.
It's the data warehouse's job to hold the data.
Yeah, and they do hold the data. It's just, I guess,
and then the next warehouse contract with.
Yeah, I might not be articulating it well. Like they'll maintain the data forever, right? But they're not allowed contractually to send that data to a third party, i.e. the new data warehouse, right? Because they promised they wouldn't do that. You know, in exchange for receiving this data, they have to promise that they're not going to send it to another third party, and they do that, right? Because the carriers want to, you know, the carriers make them promise that because they want to protect, you know, all their discounts and their contracting, and they want to limit the number of people who have access to that. So they make, you know, so there's promises in place that they're not going to send it.
Yeah.
Like
Can we
non-disclosure.
explore this deeper?
Yeah.
Get more.
Yeah.
Discuss deeper in the future.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Steve, you had your hand up, and then I'll go to Bill Overly.
Yeah, I mean, this is frustrating, obviously, but it doesn't surprise me that the carriers have contracts with data warehouses to protect their data. We found this in other areas where we couldn't get contracts with healthcare systems and things like that. I think the answer to this is in the contract with the TPAs.
Yeah.
And putting language that they have to, making it very clear that we own that data. All right, this is a self-insured plan. This isn't a fully insured plan. So it's a little different, and we pay the claims directly. So we should have access to all the data. I would suggest that this gets really resolved in the contracts with the carriers and the TPAs, and putting very strong language that if there's a transfer to a data warehouse, that they have to comply with the state requires in getting past claims.
Bill Overly.
I would agree with Steve, because if we're going to rely on the TPAs for disclosure and full transparency, I mean, we're sailing up the wrong creek unless you contractually bind them to that through an RFP. So, you know, I mean, this one just jumped out at me, and I was kind of taken back by the fact that we don't literally own or have access to beyond 2 years. But, you know, the TPAs have hidden behind a veil of secrecy for so long that, you know, maybe one way to get at this is through the RFP for the TPA.
Hey, Brian, it's Jeff Tashner. For some reason, it won't let me raise my hand, so I wanted to jump in on top of Bill if I could.
Okay.
All right. I really appreciate Bill and Paul bringing this up, and Steve weighing in. And I think it does come down to several issues that we've got to flag as a committee and keep at the forefront. It's the availability of the data. It's the preservation of the data. It's access to the data at some point in the future with or without additional cost. And I agree with Steve that we need to look at TPAs and PBMs. I said this to you and to everybody around this table, probably more than you ever want me to say it, but where else would you hire somebody to spend your money for you in a way that is supposed to be effective and efficient, get you the best deal, but you're not allowed access to the information so that you know whether or not they're fulfilling the job that you hired them to do in the way you want them to do it? And you don't have to answer that question because I know the answer. None of us would do it in our personal affairs, but that's the way this industry has structured itself. And I know in the past meeting, we talked about, well, people, look, if an environment is stale, it's not going to change unless something is the catalyst. And I hope we as a committee are starting to be the catalyst to at least change the behavior of the TPAs and the PBMs in regard to the group health insurance program and the state of Delaware. So I just wanted to weigh in. Thank you, Bill, Paul. Thank you, Steve, for adding on. And to all the other members of the committee, this is one of the big issues that we got to keep front and center for years to come.
Thank you. Any further discussion on slide 10? All right, sounds like we have a little bit of get back to before the end of next month, so we can be able to take action and approve the RFP. Anything else on this particular agenda item? Yeah, I think we're moving on. I think we're going to Brian now. Fitchel.
Thanks, Director Maxwell. Just sharing my screen. I will try to hopefully get us a little bit back on time. I also am only working from one screen today, so I'm flying a little blind, so I may not see hands up, so feel free to for the GA. Hang on. May was a good month for the GHIP. Premium contributions, a little bit worse than budget for the month. That's nothing new. That's been predominantly every month of FY25 and predominantly due to the same groups, the non-payroll groups. So it's something we've known about. The trend has continued. Other revenues came in a little more than $6 million better than budget, primarily due to higher than expected pharmacy rebates, particularly on the EGWP side. You can see EGWP rebates came in at 19.4 million versus the expected $26.4 million versus the expected $20.3 million. So primarily driven by good pharmacy rebates. Claims came in $15.5 million better than budget, almost exclusively due to the fact that there was an extra invoice processed in April that was expected in May. So on the flip side, April was worse than budget and May was expected to come in better than budget, but pretty much a wash between the two. And then expenses came in about $600,000 better than budget for the month, primarily due to program and ASO fees, but pretty much across the board. So in total for the month, $21.6 million better than budget. If you strip out the $15.5 million on the claim side, or roughly 14.5 to 15 million as expected on the claim side, predominantly about a $6 million gain to budget, again, mostly due to the pharmacy rebates. So from a full year standpoint, with 1 month to go, we're forecasting that total results will be just about $13 million better than budget. So good news for the year, with results coming in a little bit better than we had expected. From a GLP-1 standpoint, we now have actuals through May. There was an uptick again in May, so we continue to generally see upticks in utilization on the GLP-1 side, particularly for weight loss, where we seem to have a more stable, steady-like utilization on the anti-diabetes side, at least on the commercial side of the equation. But in general, we're expecting to come in right about where we thought total GLP-1 expenditures were going to be. $52 to $53 million on the weight loss side, and in the $30 to $33 million range on the diabetes side. From a long-term projection standpoint, recall that we had the 4.2% approved for FY26 which was based on a 3-year smoothing. So we continue to show our long-term projections, assuming that that 4.2%, theoretically, even though it needs to be approved annually, would be in place for each of FY27 and FY28 as well, resulting in a bit of a higher 1-year rate action for FY29 right now, based on the added results to the positive for May. That number has actually now come down to 13.9%. I think when we had results through April, it was in the 15.5% range. So again, positive news from a long-term projection standpoint. Lastly, we have experience by group. Trend continues to be about the same as we've seen, positive to budget on the active employee side and the Medicare retiree side, with the Medicare retiree side primarily driven by higher than expected other revenues, and then not unexpected, the pre-65 retirees running at a loss to budget, primarily due to the fact that, as you know, we blend all 3 groups together for a singular rate action. And had we rated pre-65 retirees on their own, they would have had a significantly higher rate action. So why don't I pause there to see if there are any questions on the financials. Commissioner Navarro, you have a question?
Yes. So $53 million for weight loss for GLP-1s, and I think you said 31 million for folks who have diabetes. Do you have any way to break that down as an average per person? Because I mean, it really is a lot of money, and so I'm just trying to wrap my arms around what that means per person who, for example, who has taken the GLP-1 drug just for
per utilizer.
Yes.
Meaning just for the people who take them, right? So
just for the people who take it for weight loss, the $53 million.
Yeah. So you basically you can see the $53 million is against a total claim count of roughly, just under 44,000. So call that, $1,300 per script.
So it's not 44,000 people.
No, it's 44,000 claims. So one person, for example, if they're staying on the drug, would have a claim each month, right?
Commissioner, point of clarification, and Brian can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the figures that you're seeing are not net of any rebate. These are
correct.
Like the total cost, not the net cost. So
this
doesn't take into account rebates that the state gets with regards to these drugs.
That's correct. And we don't have specific rebate information on the GLP-1s, but generally, rule of thumb-ish, maybe even Brian Holleran could keep me a little bit honest, rebates are probably in the 40 to 50% range, give or take.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Anywhere from maybe 30 to 45%. The general thought is all in with rebates, depending on what type of GLP-1, the cost per utilizer annually is about $7,000 to $10,000 per year.
Yeah.
And Commissioner, just to add to that point, is like there is a delay in us receiving the rebate, so it's very hard for us to kind of display the real cost in a timely manner, because we're just getting these figures and then we receive the rebates at a later point in time. So I just wanted to make sure you had full information with regards to that.
Perfect. So the number is approximately $7,000 to $10,000 a year.
On a net basis, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
all in with rebates.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And recall, just for a bit of a benchmark, this $53 million number was in the $14 million range for FY24. So pretty explosive utilization growth.
Well, it works.
Yeah. Stephen, did you have your hand up? Actually, I think I see it down there.
I did, but Brian kind of pointed out the rebate issue. But the one thing I did want to ask is, my understanding is you can get the rebate information on the class, not a specific drug. Can we just find that out at some point?
Sure.
That'd be hard to speak with benefits office. I can note that we have requested that from CVS on many occasions, and unfortunately do not receive the rebate information by class. However, CVS did provide rebate information for those specific weight loss GLP-1 drugs, which was reviewed previously with the committee and can be again reviewed at an executive session if the committee is interested to continue to look at that information.
Thank you.
I think Paul was first and then Bill Oberly.
A quick question on slide 10, expenses. Bottom half of the table for April in the left column, there's a $5.5 million jump, and then it drops back down again. Can you explain what's in that figure and what's behind the jump?
There was
Yeah,
there was a performance payment that we had to make.
Yeah,
right?
that's the shared savings payment that was made last month.
Did that go to just shared savings? It sounds like that's what would go to, but maybe not.
No, I didn't, unfortunately.
So it goes to whom?
It was for Highmark.
To
Highmark.
I thought that the mention of Highmark on slide 4 was that there was an invoice processed in a different month. That's a different thing.
Correct.
That's a different thing.
All right, thank you.
Bill Oberly.
Bill?
Sorry, I wasn't trying to annoy you.
No, that's fine. While we're talking about GLP-1s, and I'm jumping a little ahead, but we are talking about the weight loss drugs. As related to the long-term trend assumptions, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, but what I saw on a chart was by fiscal year 27, our spend for weight loss would be approximately 83 million. In fiscal 28, it would be 100 million.
Right. So I assume you're looking here, right?
Yes. No. Let's see.
That's correct.
Yeah, that's it, right. And then there was a footnote that really grabbed my attention because we've asked this question before and we were told that it's too soon to determine the savings through better health outcomes, but there was a reference to positive efficacy data. And that seemed to contradict what we've heard in the past, that it's not been, GLP-1s have not been in the environment long enough to determine the back end savings as a result of their use.
Yeah, so there was a study put forth, and again, Brian, feel free to jump into. There was a study that was put forth, I believe it was done by Aon, that showed positive efficacy data, as you stated. There were some questions relative to the study itself because, from what I recall, it was sort of like call it a closed cohort study that they only looked at people who were exclusively diligent in their treatment with the medications, and we all know today that their adherence has been a big issue with respect to these drugs. So I think there were a lot of sort of public outstanding questions relative to that study. I'm not personally aware of any other studies out there, although there may be. I don't know, Brian, anything you have to add to that?
Yeah, all the studies that I've seen thus far, and there are several in process, show that the kind of medical ROI of GLP-1s does not exceed the cost of the medications at this point. There are organizations like ICER and JAMA that have done studies here. They do provide a definite medical benefit and lower diabetes, lower cancer, lower joint replacements, that kind of thing. But all in all the studies have showed that the kind of dollar medical benefit that they provide does not exceed the cost at this point. That's kind of the crux of the studies there.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, because the footnote sort of suggested otherwise. But the one of the reasons I wanted to carve out possibly a direct contracting for GLP-1s is obviously the projections on the costs in the out years. I mean, they're unsustainable. I mean, I don't know how you can justify it. So I don't know if there's anything else we can be doing other than direct contracting, whether it's with compounders or whomever, to try to drive this cost down. But if you're looking at $100 million nut in fiscal 28, I mean, we're given I think the fiscal projections nationally and for the state, we're in dire straits.
So I may sound like a broken record, but I do want to get a work plan developed as a committee, and this is definitely a topic that I think we need to obviously put some thought behind and research as to your point, like long-term sustainability of this is questionable, right? And there's desire from others to attack the diabetes problem from a different end.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
And I just don't know how you motivate people when we were providing this mechanism to combat it. And we're just going to be piling on trying to do it. And I'm not sure it's going to be incentivizing people to do it a different way if it is more health conscious or a better solution. Yeah. So I think there's a lot going on in this arena, and we just need to kind of make it a priority and do some work around it, the topic.
Thank you.
Brian, did you have anything else?
Any other questions on the financials? So hearing none, Bill gave us a good segue into trend. So recall we use these trend assumptions for basically projecting future year claims expenses, and more specifically or more closely related to FY26 in terms of what we believe FY26 claim expenses will be versus FY25. Trend continues to be a pretty hot topic. The trend environment has been bad for a couple of years now, maybe gotten a little bit worse even in recent history due to inflation, new provider contracts, and obviously the GLP-1 expenditures. Recall last year, we did develop a fairly intricate model in terms of how we were projecting our prescription drug expenses, breaking things up into various components between specialty spend, specialty savings, GLP-1s, rebates, and then call it everything else in the kitchen sink outside of those items. This chart we continue to provide every year. We now have added obviously FY25 forecast with the 11 months of actual experience and only 1 month of the 12 being forecasted. You can see on the active and pre-65 medical side, FY25 is expected to come in about 9% higher than FY24, with the average of the prior 4 years being 8%. Prior 5 years being 8%, which lines up with the current 8% assumption that we enacted this time last year. Previously, we had been using 6%, so the 8% seems to be a good trend assumption to continue to use. I'm going to skip over a few columns and talk about the Medicare side on the medical benefit. FY25 came in, you can see it being a 10% number, so trends have upticked a bunch on the Medicare side as well. Even the past few years, the 4, 6, 5, 6 were higher than what we had seen historically. Last year at this time, we increased the medical trend from 3% to 5%. And with the last few years being predominantly 6 or greater. We're recommending that we increase that trend assumption from 5% to 6% going forward. And then on the prescription drug side, so now FY24, FY25 in this exhibit are basically actuals, noting that FY25 is a 11-month actual and 1-month forecast. But these numbers for FY25 actually came in pretty close to spot on to what we had projected at this time last year, with obviously the driver being this GLP-1 section with the 275% actual trend on the weight loss side and 25% on the diabetes side, which weighted heavily into the overall 27% trend that we saw in FY25 on the pharmacy side. At this time last year, our assumption using the same type of approach and weights produced a number at 29%. So we came in pretty darn close on the commercial side for the prescription drug trend, at least built up in the aggregate. And then also very similar on the EGWP side, when we had the two components last year, the trend assumption was 11%, actuals came in at 12. So we were pretty close to spot on for FY25, and therefore not really seeing any much of a different need to change our trend assumptions going forward. So you can see that on the GLP-1 weight loss side, we have high trends for FY26 at 43%, but it's a narrowing, it's a coming down of that trend assumption from FY25, which gets back to the chart that Bill was talking about, that will ultimately see the trend rates start to level off, but still be at a relatively high standpoint where we would produce overall average before rebate trends of 16% for FY26, 11% for 27, and then 9 and 9 by FY28 and 29. And those numbers, those 16, 11, 9, and 9, are basically right in line with what we had recommended at the same time last year. So overall, essentially what we're suggesting is leaving the medical trend for actives and pre-65s at 8%, increasing the medical trend for the Medicare population from 5% to 6%, and then ultimately keeping the pharmacy trends in line with the same recommendation at this time last year. In terms of rebates, you can see the footnote that the rebate side of this equation does not yet contemplate the exclusion of Zepbound. We just need to get a little bit more clarity from CVS in terms of what the impact of removing Zepbound from the commercial formulary will have on rebates, which should produce some additional savings on the rebate side, which has no bearing on our trend assumption. So let me pause there.
Not seeing any questions, Brian. Thank you.
Awesome. Pleasure.
If we'll move to public comment.
Committee members did receive a written public comment earlier today. I did not have anyone pre-registered. Is there anyone in the room right now that would like to make a public comment? Anyone? Nope. I do see, it looks like we have Stephen LePage logged in virtually, so I will start with him. You there, Steve? Mr. LePage, are you able to turn on your microphone? You have access.
Okay, it just now came on.
There we go.
Okay. So I've been keeping an eye on hospital and prescription pricing since around 2013 or 2014. And it's good to see that we're finally starting to push for more transparency and a focus on net costs when it comes to prescription drugs. That's a step in the right direction, especially if we're aiming to move toward a reverse auction model. which will also depend on having a clear upfront pricing. So I'm definitely glad to see that we're moving in that direction, and I hope it bears some fruit. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that's logged in virtually that would like to make a public comment? Please raise your hand. The chat is open as well. If you're unable to raise your hand and you would like to make a comment, you can type something in the chat. I think that's everything. I don't see any more, so I will turn it back over to Director Maxwell.
All right. I have, if anybody has any other business to bring before the committee.
Get an estimate, and it's going to be today at any stretch, for the PRCs that are coming up, what weeks, months they're likely to unfold on.
Yes, absolutely. We do have a schedule for that. There is subject to change, especially for the PBM RFP, just knowing that we may get more bidders than originally anticipated, but we'd be happy to share that with you.
Any other comments from community members? Okay.
Move to adjourn.
I have a motion to adjourn. Can I get a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye. If you're
Aye.
opposed,
Aye.
stay here by yourself. Have a good weekend, everybody.
You too. Thank you.